Welcome back to Homa Studio. This is Homa, and we're going to work with Python turtles, and we're going to use a function, and we're going to use arguments and parameters to draw some squares, and it's going to look something like this. And we're going to use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, CMYK, and we're basically going to use one function to make it nice and efficient and use 4 function calls, and then we're going to throw some arguments into the parameters so we can make them draw squares in different positions and different colors. And I'm going to go through the whole process with you just to familiarize yourself with the turtles again, since I started a video at the end of my Python for Beginners playlist, but we'll jump into this a little bit more. And just a couple things to point out, because I think this is an updated version of Replit. We're going to be working in the Replit IDE, and we have to work with the Python turtle when you do that. And there's a little tiny turtle there. You probably can't see it, but we're going to do that. And when you hit center here, that'll center it. And by default, it'll draw squares starting at 0, 0, and it'll go over, up, across, and down. And that's how we're going to draw one, and then we're going to duplicate this by using this stuff here. So let's start from scratch. I'm going to go into here and make a new repel, and I'll make sure I choose Python with turtle, and I'll name it right away. And there it is. And I'll just check my settings. Make sure that you go down and put code intelligence on. Make sure this is enabled. If it ever doesn't work, try just refreshing it, because I had a situation at one point where it wasn't working, and then when I refreshed it, it worked okay. I'm going to use my indent size at 4 so that our indents are a little more pronounced. And I'll close this up here. And the first thing I'm going to do here in my Python turtle, again, there's the little turtle, is I'm going to say import turtle. And we'll import the turtle module. And it's lowercase when we import a module. And it's really just importing a file called turtle.py, but you don't have to put the py on there. And the first thing I'll do is I'll instantiate our turtle, meaning I'm going to make an instance of the turtle, and I'll just call it t because that's nice and short. And I'll say t equals, just like we're doing a variable, and it's going to be from the turtle module dot from the turtle class. And there's a screen class we could use, but we're not going to use that yet. We're just going to use the turtle class. And if you need to know anything about the turtle class or the screen class, if you just search Python turtles, it'll take you to the python.org documentation of all this, and I'll go through this. You could go to the top here if you need to know about any of these methods or properties or attributes, any of that kind of stuff. We'll go through this as we need it. Speed, for example. Since I'm here, I'll look at speed because we're going to make it speed up a little bit. And here they give you some attributes for speed, like 0 being the fastest, 1 through 10, 10 being fast, 1 being with the slowest. So we might speed it up to like 10 so it runs a little faster as we're drawing these squares. All right, so we're going to draw a square first. Now, we just instantiated our turtle, and its name is t. And if you run it, you won't see anything until you start giving it some properties. So properties or attributes, I think as they're technically called, would be something like color. So you could say t.color, and then in the parentheses, you give it an argument of, I'll use green for now. And I'll make sure it's in quotes as a string. So any colors have to be strings with the quotes on. Unless it's going to be a variable that you create, then you could use the variable name without quotes. And if I make it green, let's see what happens here. And there's a little arrow. That's actually classic by default. If you changed its shape, and I'll make another attribute here, and I'll say t.shape. And in quotes, I'll put turtle. If you wanted to use the turtle shape, then it'll look like a turtle. And if you wanted to use arrow, there's a different kind of arrow, and I think there's a circle and a square or something. If you go in here, if you go back into the turtle documentation, you can define the shape properties. Here's appearance, shape, and if you go in here, you'll see things like arrow, turtle, circle, square, triangle, classic. And like I said, we'll probably just use classic. And if you didn't put anything in here, it should use classic by default. So if you left that empty, that's just the classic arrow there. And if you didn't do anything, it would still just use the classic arrow. Okay, and we're going to eventually put this in a function. Now, what we're going to do first before we put it in a function is we're just going to make it go over, up, over, and down. And it has to do 2 things. It has to go forward, and it has to turn. So those are going to be 2 methods that we're going to use. So we're going to say t.forward, and I'm going to put in an argument for forward. I'm just going to put in 100, like 100 pixels. And if I run it right now, it's just going to go forward 100 pixels. And what we're going to have to do is make it turn, and then go forward and turn, and make it go forward again 4 times. Now, we've already done this, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. And I'll type t.left, and I'll put a degrees in here of 90 degrees. So it turns 90 degrees, and then it goes forward again. And you can see that's what it's doing. So it's going forward, turning 90 degrees. Now, if we want to do this 4 times, you could do this. You could copy this, paste, 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 and copy and paste it 4 times. Now, if you do this, it'll go and draw a square. Now, it doesn't fill it yet. If you want to fill it, we have to use begin fill before and after all this other stuff. So before it starts drawing your square, or before it starts creating your square, we could do t dot begin fill, and then when you're done filling it, we can go to the end and do t dot end fill. And you have to use underscores for these, and they don't take any arguments, so it's just begin fill, end fill, that's all you need. And they kind of bracket around everything that you're doing, and there it is. It should be green at the end. Now it's filled, and if you don't want to see your turtle at the end, you could hide turtle. We could do t dot hide turtle. Now, I copied and pasted this 4 times. That's kind of inefficient having all that code, so I'm going to get rid of all this and just leave the first 2, and what we're going to do is put it in a loop. So we could just hit enter here, and I could put for I in range. Now range requires a integer, so I'm going to put in 4 because we're going to do it 4 times, and then make sure you put your colon after that, and then these have to be indented. Now when you type it and you hit return, it's going to indent them automatically, but I'm going to use my tab key here and put those in there. So those are the only things you want indented. They're going to do that 4 times. It's going to go forward and left 4 times, and the begin fill and end fill is not part of that loop, so make sure you keep that out at the margin. And if we do this, it should do the same thing, except you won't see the turtle at the end, and it disappears. So there's our green one. Now if you wanted to make it cyan like we're going to do, you could put cyan in here. And there's a cyan one. So that's kind of what our first one is going to look like. Now what I'll do is put this whole thing in a function. So I'm going to put def to define our function, and I'm going to call it draw square because that's what we're going to do. So we'll make it identify what we're doing, and that's going to be our function. And then all this stuff can be indented over. It indented that automatically, but you could highlight this and just hit your tab key, and that'll move everything over. So there's our function definition. Now if I run it right now, it's not going to do anything. Why? Because we didn't call our function yet. So we need a function call, and I'll put 2 spaces in here. And also remember to do this. If you just put a function call here, a lot of people do this by mistake when they're starting out. They keep it indented, and then when you run it, nothing happens, and they don't know what's going on, and that's because this function call is inside the function definition because it's still indented. You have to make sure you bring this back out. So make sure this comes back out to the margin. It's not a part of that function definition. Now it's going to come down here and see this function call, and it's going to run this function. It's going to initiate or instantiate a turtle. It's going to make it cyan. It's going to do the begin fill. Then it's going to run this loop, and then it's going to hide the turtle at the end. So let's see what happens. And name draw square is not defined on line 13. What did I do wrong? Draw square. Oh, I spelled it wrong. So I got an error down here because it doesn't match up to the function. It's looking for draw square and it's not finding it. So I spelled that wrong, so I'll fix that. And again, if I had my code hints working, which they're not working right now, it would have started to use the word draw square and I could have just clicked on it. But hopefully that'll pick up as we start working here. I'll even refresh it one more time, see if that works. All right, so I'm just going to try it real quick. If I go here and I type draw, there we go, now it's working. So I guess I had to refresh it twice. So I could click on draw square and do that. So I think our code hints are going to work from now on. Sometimes it's a little unpredictable. So there's our function call, and there's our function definition. Remember to use the colon. Remember to have all these indented, and we're just drawing one square, and it's cyan. And we have that as part of the function. So obviously if we want to make other squares, like a magenta one here, a yellow one here, and a black one there, we don't want cyan in here. So what we could do is we could send it in as an argument. And the way to do that is basically take this out, or cut it. Maybe I'll just cut it and put it here. And that's going to be an argument. That means when we call the function, we're going to make it cyan. And we're going to send in cyan up here. Now it needs to know, if you're using an argument, you need a parameter up here, and you could use just a placeholder, and it's kind of like a variable. You could just put C here and say C is going to be the variable that represents cyan. It's almost the same thing as doing this. If you did this, you'd basically kind of make a local variable right inside the function here, and then it could be used here. Now if you did that, you would not need an argument, because basically you're putting the parameter and argument right here. You're defining a local variable. So you could say C equals cyan, and you could run it, and that would work. And it's basically putting C in here. But we don't want to do that because we want to do a couple function calls and have the colors change. So we don't want to hard code this in here. So we're just going to put C, and then when we call the function, it's going to be sent as an argument. or an actual parameter. So I'll put cyan down here. So now when I call the function, it's going to use cyan, and because there's 1 and 1, it's looking for one argument. The parameter is looking for one argument, and there it is. Now, if you put something else in there, you're going to get a mismatch. So you always have to have the same number of parameters as arguments. And right now we have 1 and 1, and that should work fine. And then it's just whatever we put in here as C is going to get plugged in here for C for the color. And it's going to be this string cyan. So this should work again, so this won't look any different. All right, so everything's working fine. We now have a function call, we have an argument, and we have a parameter, which is kind of creating a local variable for this function. Now, if we wanted to draw a second one, we could just make another function call here, and I'll just copy it. Now this time we will call it, although you can run these through loops, but we're changing the arguments that are here, and I'll make one that's magenta. And I'll run it, and what it should do is make one that's cyan and make a magenta one right on top of it. And that's what happens. Now that's not what we want. We want to move it over. To move it over, we're going to have to change its start point. Now let's go and change the start point. Oh, we didn't put a start point because the default start point is 0, 0. We didn't have to put one in there, but let's put one in there so that we can change it. So even though the first one is going to start at 0, 0, we'll still put that in there. And where we'll do that is after we define or after we instantiate the turtle, give it its color, we're going to do a goTo. We're going to do t.goTo, and it's all one word. And what you do for goTo is the arguments that it takes for that method is going to be an xy. So if this is 0, 0, the magenta is going to have to be at negative 100 for the x and 0 for the y. So we can put in arguments in there. So now we're not going to put in hard-coded numbers here because we're going to send them along as arguments. Otherwise, it would be the same every time. So I'm just going to put xy in here, and they're going to kind of be variables, local variables that we'll use. That means we have to send them the values. So we're now going to have 3 arguments. We're going to have the color, which is C, and then we're going to have x and y. So if we have 3 parameters, we're going to have to send 3 arguments. So for cyan, I'm going to put 0, 0 because that's where that one started. And for the second one, we're going to put negative 100, 0 because that's where that one's going to start. Negative 100 for the x and 0 for the y. So that's where that's going to start. So this should put a cyan one and then a magenta one right next to it to the left. Let's try it out. Now that little backwards thing, we're going to have to fix that because it's actually going to have its pen down when it goes to a different place. So you might see the pen with it. We might have to do a pen up before it goes somewhere. And that'll take away that pen. Matter of fact, we could do that right now. We're going to kind of bracket our pen up, pen down around the goTo. And that's typically like begin fill and end fill, usually brackets around creating some kind of shape. You could use pen up and pen down to bracket around the goTo so that it doesn't have its pen down when you go somewhere, so you don't see a line trailing behind it. So we're going to do t.up. You could use pen up or up, so I'm just going to use up. And then after it gets there, we're going to say t.down, which is going to put its pen down. So we could just use a shortcut for down. That way, when we do this, you won't see it doing that little back thing. Well, it does go back, but you don't see the line being drawn. So it still moves there, but when it goes somewhere else, then you won't see a line being drawn when it goes there. So after doing that one, we're going to do another one here. I'll just copy this magenta one and paste it. And this one is going to be yellow. And it's also going to be negative 100 because it's going to be over here. It's going to be negative 100 for the x, and it's going to be negative 100 for the y. So this will be negative 100, negative 100. And we'll see how this looks. And it should make it yellow. And you can see that one went across when it started, so we would have saw a line there. And also, let me speed it up. I'll do t.speed, and we'll put in 10 so it goes fast. And we'll run it one more time just to see if the speed works. You can see that looks a lot better. It takes less time testing it out. And then we just have one more to do, which is going to be the black one down here. And this one's going to be black. Now, if you ever spelled a color wrong or anything, it'll use black by default. But we're going to use 0 for the x because it's going to start just like the cyan, but then it's still going to do the negative 100 for the y. So this first part is going to be 0. It's going to go over 0. It's not going to go over at all, and then it's just going to go down negative 100. So this will draw a black square. And And there it is. And that's all we're doing in this first exercise. We're doing 4 function calls that are calling with 3 arguments. They're using a color, they're using an X and a Y, and that's what we're changing here. Now, what we're going to do in part 2 of this is we're going to add an R, a G, and a B, and then I guess for another one we'll use a gray. So let's use black in this one. We use like a gray. We'll add smaller squares kind of in between over here, in between over here, and in between over there. So if we're making smaller squares, we're going to have to add another argument because we already have 100 built in. The 100 kind of makes the size. So when it's going over 100, that's how big it is. So we'll make it about half the size. And we're going to do that in part 2. So we're going to continue with turtle CMYK, and part 2 will be RGB, but that'll be a very quick one because we're just going to add 4 more function calls here and just add another argument to do that. So see you back for Homa Studio part 2 of our turtle squares.